For the 1000th time, "I'm not going," Fiona Zimmerman declared, clutching her phone to her ear while frantically searching for her keys. The morning sun streamed through her apartment windows, illuminating the organized chaos of her living room. "Lisa, I appreciate the effort, but blind dates are my personal nightmare. Remember the guy who brought his mother last time?" Her best friend's laughter echoed through the speaker. "Trust me, this one is different. He's successful, intelligent, and according to my boyfriend's brother, he's not weird at all." "That's a ringing endorsement," Fiona replied sarcastically, finally locating her keys under a stack of manuscript pages. As an editor at Pinnacle Publishing, she spent her days fixing other people's stories, but had grown increasingly convinced that her own love life would remain perpetually unresolved. At 28, she wasn't desperate, just tired of disappointing setups. "Just this once," Lisa pleaded. "If it's terrible, I'll never ask again, and I'll buy you those ridiculously expensive chocolates you love for a month." Fiona sighed, knowing she was fighting a losing battle. "Fine, one dinner. But if he talks about cryptocurrency for more than 5 minutes, I'm faking a medical emergency." "Deal! Saturday at 8, Oriole. Wear that blue dress that makes your eyes pop." After hanging up, Fiona stared at her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun, dark circles underlining her blue eyes. The publishing deadline for their winter catalog was approaching, and sleep had become a luxury. A date was the last thing she needed, but perhaps it would be a welcome distraction from the mountain of manuscripts waiting for her attention. The rest of the week passed in a blur of red ink and coffee. By Saturday evening, Fiona had almost convinced herself to cancel, rehearsing excuses about food poisoning or a sudden deadline. But Lisa's persistent text messages, alternating between encouragement and threats, eventually pushed her into the blue dress and a pair of heels she rarely wore. Oriole was one of Manhattan's finest restaurants, its elegant interior gleaming with soft lighting and polished surfaces. Fiona arrived 15 minutes late, partly due to subway delays and partly due to her own reluctance. As the maitre d' led her toward a table near the back, her heart hammered against her ribs. "Your party is waiting, miss," he said with a slight bow, gesturing toward a table where a man sat with his back to her. Taking a deep breath, Fiona approached. The man rose as she neared, revealing himself to be tall, much taller than she expected, with broad shoulders and dark hair cut in an expensive style. When he turned to face her, Fiona nearly stumbled. He was, without exaggeration, strikingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of burnished gold. His tailored suit probably cost more than her monthly rent, but it was the genuine warmth in his smile that momentarily disarmed her. "You must be Fiona," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Connor Adamson. It's a pleasure to meet you." His hand enveloped hers, warm and firm. Fiona found her voice despite her initial shock. "Yes, I'm Fiona. Sorry I'm late, subway issues." "No apology necessary. I just got here myself. Work ran long." He pulled out her chair, and Fiona sat, suddenly conscious of her moderately priced dress and the tiny scuff on her left heel. As Connor settled across from her, Fiona noticed a waiter materialize instantly at his side, presenting a wine list with exaggerated deference. Connor glanced at her. "Do you have any preferences?" "I'm not particularly knowledgeable about wine," she admitted. "I'll trust your judgment." Connor ordered without looking at the menu, something French with an unpronounceable name, and the waiter practically bowed before retreating. "So?" Fiona began, desperate to break the ice. "How do you know Lisa's boyfriend's brother?" "Tom and I went to Harvard together," Connor replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "We've remained friends despite our different career paths. He went into law, and I chose business." "What kind of business?" Fiona asked, grateful when the waiter returned with wine, giving her something to do with her hands. Connor smiled slightly, swirling the ruby liquid in his glass. "Investment banking primarily, though my interests have diversified over the years." There was something modest in his tone that contrasted with his obviously expensive attire. Fiona took a sip of wine, surprised by its rich complexity. "This is delicious." "I'm glad you like it. It's from a small vineyard in the Loire Valley. I visited there a few years ago. Sounds lovely, Fiona said, trying not to calculate how many mortgage payments such a trip would cost her. I've never been to France. It's beautiful, though overrated in some ways. I find the countryside more charming than Paris. Connor leaned forward slightly. But I'd rather hear about you. Tom mentioned you work in publishing? Fiona nodded, surprised he'd bothered to ask about her beforehand. I'm an editor at Pinnacle, mostly fiction, though I occasionally work on memoirs too. That sounds fascinating. Any famous authors I might recognize? A few, Fiona admitted, though I spend most of my time with promising new writers who haven't broken through yet. That's the part I love most, helping shape a raw talent into something polished. Like a diamond cutter, Connor observed, and Fiona felt a small thrill at his apt comparison. The conversation flowed unexpectedly well as they ordered their meals. Connor asked insightful questions about her work, listening with genuine interest as she explained the publishing process. In turn, she learned he had built his career from scratch, starting at an investment firm before branching out on his own. It wasn't easy at first, he confessed over their entrees. There were many sleepless nights and cold calls that led nowhere. But you succeeded, Fiona noted, gesturing subtly at his clearly expensive watch. Connor shrugged. I was fortunate in many ways. Right place, right time for some investments. But I've never forgotten where I started. There was something refreshingly humble about him that contradicted Fiona's expectations of successful men in finance. His stories included failures alongside victories, and he spoke about his employees with genuine respect. By dessert, a delicate chocolate soufflé they agreed to share, Fiona had almost forgotten this was a blind date she'd been dreading. Connor was charming without being slick, intelligent without being condescending, and focused on their conversation in a way that made the bustling restaurant fade into the background. I have to admit, she said as they waited for the check, this evening has been much better than I anticipated. Connor's eyebrows rose. Were your expectations that low? Fiona laughed, feeling her cheeks warm. My track record with blind dates is abysmal. My last date spent 45 minutes explaining why his ex-girlfriend was emotionally unstable while simultaneously texting her. On behalf of my gender, I apologize, Connor said with a smile that created a small dimple in his right cheek. Though I'm glad your standards were sufficiently lowered to make me seem impressive by comparison. When the check arrived, Connor took it without comment, waving away Fiona's offer to split the bill. Please, I invited you. And besides, I enjoyed myself thoroughly. Outside the restaurant, the April evening had grown chilly. Fiona pulled her light jacket closer as they stood somewhat awkwardly on the sidewalk. May I call you a car? Connor offered. I usually take the subway, she replied, then immediately wondered if that sounded pathetic to someone who probably had a driver. Then allow me to walk you to the station, he said, surprising her, unless you'd prefer I didn't. No, that would be nice, Fiona found herself saying, even though the station was several blocks away. As they walked, Connor casually steered her to the inside of the sidewalk, away from the street, a small, old-fashioned courtesy that Fiona found unexpectedly touching. Their conversation continued effortlessly, moving from books they'd both read to movies they'd enjoyed. At the subway entrance, Connor paused. I had a wonderful time tonight, Fiona. Would you consider having dinner with me again next week? Perhaps Wednesday? Fiona hesitated only briefly. I'd like that. Excellent. His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes. I'll call you tomorrow, if that's all right? Yes, that's fine, she replied, suddenly shy. Connor surprised her by gently taking her hand and raising it to his lips for the briefest of kisses. Until then. As Fiona descended the subway stairs, she couldn't help glancing back. Connor stood watching her, tall and imposing against the city lights. He raised his hand in a small wave, and she returned it before disappearing into the station. On the train ride home, Fiona replayed the evening in her mind. The date had been pleasant, more than pleasant, but she reminded herself not to get carried away. Men like Connor, successful and handsome, usually had complicated lives. For all she knew, he dated frequently and without serious intentions. By the time she reached her apartment, She had convinced herself that while it had been a lovely evening, it was unlikely to develop into anything meaningful. Still, when her phone chimed with a text as she was removing her makeup, her heart skipped. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. Looking forward to Wednesday. Sleep well. Connor." Despite her best efforts at restraint, Fiona fell asleep with a smile on her face. Monday morning brought reality crashing back in the form of urgent emails and 3 manuscript deadlines. Fiona barely had time to think about Connor until her lunch break, when Lisa called, demanding details. So? Was he as dreamy as Tom's brother claimed? Fiona hesitated, unwilling to feed Lisa's matchmaking ego, but equally unwilling to lie. He was nice. Nice? Lisa's voice rose an octave. Connor Adamson gets featured in business magazines and you're calling him nice? Did you even talk to him? Of course I did, Fiona replied, choking slightly on her sandwich. Wait, what do you mean, featured in magazines? Lisa made an exasperated sound. You didn't Google him? Fiona, he's the founder of Adamson Capital. The man is worth millions, maybe billions by now. He made Forbes's 30 under 40 list last year. Fiona set down her sandwich, appetite suddenly gone. You set me up with a millionaire and didn't think to mention it? Would you have gone if I had? No, Fiona admitted, thinking of her tiny apartment and modest salary. But that's not the point. I looked like an idiot, not knowing who he was. Did he seem to mind? Lisa asked shrewdly. Fiona recalled Connor's attentive conversation, how he'd seemed genuinely interested in her work despite its relative insignificance compared to his. No, he was considerate. Then stop overthinking it. Are you seeing him again? Wednesday, Fiona admitted reluctantly. Lisa's squeal of delight caused Fiona to hold the phone away from her ear. I knew it. You're perfect for each other. It's just dinner, Fiona protested. And now that I know he's some finance mogul, I'm even more skeptical this could go anywhere. Why? Because he's successful? Because we're from different worlds, Fiona explained, trying to ignore the disappointment settling in her stomach. People like him date socialites or models, not publishing editors who live in Brooklyn walk-ups. Or maybe he's tired of superficial relationships and wants someone real, Lisa suggested. Just give it a chance, Fee. What's the worst that could happen? The worst, Fiona thought after hanging up, was that she could start caring for someone completely out of her league, only to have her heart broken when reality inevitably intruded. When Wednesday arrived, Fiona seriously considered canceling. The knowledge of Connor's wealth and status had created an intimidation she hadn't felt during their first meeting. But professionalism won out. She had made a commitment, and she would honor it, even if only to politely explain why further dates wouldn't be practical. This time, Connor had suggested a smaller Italian restaurant in the West Village, less ostentatious than Oriole, but still elegant. When Fiona arrived precisely on time, he was already waiting outside, dressed more casually in dark jeans and a light blue button-down that emphasized his broad shoulders. Fiona, he greeted her with a warm smile, leaning in to kiss her cheek lightly. You look beautiful. Thank you, she replied, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and the fact that she'd reused the same heels from their first date. This place looks charming. It's one of my favorites, Connor explained as he held the door. The owner, Giuseppe, came from Italy 30 years ago and still makes all the pasta by hand. Inside, the restaurant was intimate and warm, with brick walls and soft lighting. To Fiona's surprise, Connor led her past the main dining room to a small courtyard in the back, where a single table was set beneath strands of twinkling lights and potted lemon trees. I hope you don't mind, he said, pulling out her chair. I thought it might be nicer to talk without the noise. Fiona sank into her seat, momentarily speechless at the romantic setting. It's lovely, she managed finally, but you didn't have to go to such trouble. It's no trouble, Connor assured her as he sat across from her. Giuseppe is an old friend. An elderly Italian man appeared almost immediately, embracing Connor with enthusiastic affection before turning to Fiona with a beaming smile. Ah, bellissima, he exclaimed, kissing her hand. Connor has good taste, yes? I will bring my special menu for the beautiful lady. Before Fiona could respond, Giuseppe had disappeared, leaving her slightly flustered. "He seems energetic." Connor laughed, a rich sound that sent unexpected warmth through her. "Giuseppe believes food and love are interchangeable concepts. He'll probably try to marry us off before dessert." The comment hung in the air, creating a moment of awkward silence that Connor smoothly navigated past by asking about her week. Fiona found herself describing her current project, an ambitious historical novel that needed significant structural editing. "The author has incredible talent," she explained as Giuseppe returned with wine and appetizers they hadn't ordered. "But the narrative jumps between timelines in a way that confuses rather than intrigues. I'm trying to help him reshape it without losing the emotional core." "That sounds challenging," Connor said, his eyes focused entirely on her. "How do you balance respecting his vision with making necessary changes?" Fiona was surprised by the perceptiveness of the question. "That's exactly the dilemma. I never want to impose my voice over an author's, but sometimes they're too close to see structural problems." Their conversation flowed easily through multiple courses that Giuseppe insisted on bringing personally, each accompanied by dramatic declarations about secret family recipes. Connor seemed genuinely interested in Fiona's work and life, asking thoughtful questions about her family, parents in Ohio, younger sister in graduate school, and her path to becoming an editor. In turn, Fiona cautiously asked about his business, careful not to reveal she'd spent the previous evening researching him online. "It started small," Connor explained, breaking a piece of fresh bread. "I had some success with early investments during college, which gave me capital to start my own firm after graduation. The first few years were challenging. I worked out of a tiny office with just 2 employees. And now?" Fiona prompted, knowing from her research that Adamson Capital occupied 3 floors of a prestigious midtown building. "Now it's grown beyond what I imagined," Connor admitted, a hint of wonder in his voice. "We have over 200 employees globally, but the fundamental principles remain the same: smart investments in companies with ethical practices and sustainable models." "That's impressive," Fiona said, unsure how else to respond to such success. Connor's expression shifted, becoming slightly guarded. "Does it bother you? My work, I mean." Fiona hesitated, deciding honesty was the only reasonable approach. "Not your work specifically. But I should be honest, I didn't realize who you were when we first met. Lisa neglected to mention certain details about your professional standing." Understanding dawned on his face. "Ah, you've been doing some research." "Just a quick internet search," Fiona admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. "I was curious after Lisa mentioned you'd been in some business publications." Connor leaned back slightly, studying her. "And now that you know, does it change things?" The question was direct, his golden eyes intent on her face. Fiona considered her answer carefully. "It makes me wonder why someone like you would be interested in someone like me," she finally said. "Our worlds are very different, Connor." "Perhaps that's precisely why I find you refreshing," he replied without hesitation. "In my experience, wealth often attracts people interested primarily in what I can provide materially. You spoke passionately for 2 hours about literature without once asking what kind of car I drive." Fiona couldn't help smiling. "What kind of car do you drive?" "A very practical electric sedan," he answered with a matching smile. "Boring, but environmentally responsible." The tension broken. They finished their meal with lighter conversation. When Giuseppe brought dessert, a delicate tiramisu with 2 forks, he winked at Fiona so obviously that she laughed. "Your friend is not subtle," she observed as Giuseppe retreated, humming an Italian love song. "Subtlety is not an Italian specialty," Connor agreed, pushing the dessert toward her. "But his heart is in the right place, and his tiramisu is unparalleled." After dinner, Connor suggested a walk along the nearby Hudson River Park. The April evening was mild, stars faintly visible despite the city lights. They strolled side by side, close but not touching. As Fiona described her dream of eventually opening a small bookshop that specialized in forgotten classics. "I love discovering overlooked literary gems," she explained as they paused to watch boats on the dark water. There's something magical about introducing readers to books that have fallen out of the mainstream conversation, but still have so much to offer. You should do it, Connor said simply. The world needs more people pursuing work they're passionate about. Maybe someday, Fiona replied, when I've saved enough to take the risk. They reached a quieter section of the park where the city seemed momentarily distant. Connor turned toward her, his expression serious in the dim light. Fiona, I've enjoyed these evenings with you immensely. I'd like to continue seeing you if you're interested, but I sense you have reservations. Fiona appreciated his directness. I do enjoy your company. I'm just concerned that our different circumstances might eventually become an issue. Why don't we address those concerns as they arise, rather than anticipating problems? Connor suggested, stepping slightly closer. I'm not asking for promises, just an opportunity to know you better. His proximity was distracting, his cologne subtle but appealing. Fiona found herself nodding before she'd fully considered her answer. All right, one step at a time. Connor's smile was worth her concession. Slowly, telegraphing his intentions, he leaned down. His lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was almost tentative, a question rather than a demand. Fiona responded instinctively, her hand rising to rest lightly on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. The kiss deepened slightly before Connor pulled back, his eyes searching hers. I've wanted to do that since you walked into Oriole. Fiona smiled, surprised by her own boldness. I'm glad you finally did. Later that night, as Fiona prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a text from Connor. Thank you for a wonderful evening. Giuseppe has already asked when we'll return. Sleep well. Fiona hugged the phone to her chest, allowing herself a moment of optimism before reality reasserted itself. She was dating if 2 dinners could be called dating a millionaire whose world intersected with hers only by chance. Practical as always, she set her alarm and tried to focus on tomorrow's manuscript review rather than the memory of Connor's kiss. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind. Connor called daily, their conversations ranging from quick check-ins to hour-long discussions about everything from politics to childhood memories. They met for dinner twice more, then expanded to other activities. A Sunday morning at the Museum of Modern Art, where Connor surprised her with his knowledge of contemporary artists, an off-Broadway play that left them debating its merits over late-night coffee, and a ferry ride to Governor's Island, where they rented bikes and explored the car-free paths. Throughout their dates, Connor was attentive and increasingly affectionate, holding her hand or placing his arm around her waist with natural ease. Their goodnight kisses grew longer and more intense, but he never pressed for more, always ending the evening with respectful restraint that both frustrated and relieved Fiona. For her part, Fiona found herself thinking about Connor at inappropriate moments during editorial meetings, while brushing her teeth as she rode the subway to work. His humor, intelligence, and subtle kindness had crept past her defenses, creating an attachment she hadn't planned for but couldn't deny. Still, she maintained certain boundaries. When Connor suggested cooking dinner at his place, Fiona gently deflected, not yet ready to enter his private world. She hadn't invited him to her apartment either, acutely conscious of the contrast between his lifestyle and her modest home. By their 7th date, a concert in Central Park followed by ice cream, these unspoken boundaries began to feel artificial. As they walked through the park, Connor's hand warm in hers, Fiona decided honesty was overdue. Connor, she began as they found a relatively private bench, I need to talk to you about something. His expression grew serious. That sounds ominous. It's not exactly. It's just... Fiona took a deep breath. I've been holding back because I'm worried about where this is going. The truth is, our lives are very different. You run a multi-million-dollar company. I edit books in a cubicle. You probably have an apartment overlooking the park, while I have a 1-bedroom walk-up with noisy neighbors and radiators that clank all night. Connor listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. I like you more than I expected to, Fiona continued, but I'm scared of getting hurt when you inevitably realize we're not compatible long-term. When she finished, Connor was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Finally, he spoke. May I respond? Fiona nodded, her heart hammering. First, I appreciate your honesty. Second, you're right that my apartment does overlook the park, which is merely geography, not a reflection of character. And third, I understand your concerns, but I think you're making assumptions about what matters to me. He shifted to face her more directly. Fiona, I've dated women from similar backgrounds, wealthy families, elite educations, the right social connections. Those relationships failed because they lacked substance. What attracts me to you isn't your address or bank balance, but your passion, intelligence, and genuine heart. His hand found hers again, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I don't care that you take the subway instead of calling a car service. I care that you stayed 2 hours after a book signing to talk to an aspiring writer who needed encouragement. I care that you call your parents every Sunday without fail. I care that you notice details others miss. Fiona felt tears threatening and blinked rapidly. But eventually, these differences will matter. Your colleagues, your friends, they'll wonder what you're doing with someone like me. Anyone who would judge you based on your income or address isn't someone whose opinion I value, Connor said firmly. And for what it's worth, my closest friends are people I knew before I had any success. My best friend teaches high school science in Queens. His sincerity was difficult to doubt. Fiona sighed, feeling some of her tension release. I'm sorry. I've been overthinking this. Don't apologize for being cautious with your heart, Connor said softly. That's part of what makes it so valuable. He leaned forward, kissing her with a tenderness that made her previous concerns seem distant and unimportant. When they separated, his eyes held a question. Would you be willing to come to my place for dinner tomorrow? I make an excellent risotto, and you can judge my apartment for yourself. Fiona hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that. The next evening, Fiona spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing her outfit, settling finally on a simple dress that was neither too casual nor too formal. As the Uber, which Connor had insisted on sending, approached his address on Central Park West, her nervousness returned full force. The doorman greeted her by name, clearly expecting her arrival, and directed her to the private elevator that served the building's penthouse. The elevator required a key card, which the doorman provided, explaining that Mr. Adamson had authorized her access. As the elevator ascended smoothly, Fiona tried to prepare herself for whatever display of luxury awaited. The doors opened directly into a foyer with soaring ceilings and a spectacular view of Central Park through floor-to-ceiling windows. The apartment was modern and undoubtedly expensive, but not ostentatious, tasteful furniture in neutral tones, contemporary art on the walls, and surprisingly, personal touches like stacks of books and framed photographs. Fiona? Connor's voice came from what appeared to be the kitchen. I'm just finishing up. Make yourself comfortable. She moved further into the living room, drawn to the wall of windows. The park stretched below, a green oasis amid the urban landscape, the lights of the city beginning to twinkle as dusk approached. It was breathtaking. Beautiful, isn't it? Connor said, suddenly beside her. He wore casual clothes, dark jeans, and a Henley pushed up to his elbows, and held 2 glasses of wine. It's what sold me on this place. I spend most mornings having coffee right here. Fiona accepted the wine he offered. It's incredible, though I imagine the price tag was equally breathtaking. Connor smiled ruefully. It was an indulgence, I admit, but after years of living in a studio apartment during the early days of my company, I promised myself one significant luxury if I succeeded. This glimpse of his earlier, less affluent life made Fiona curious. Tell me about those early days. What was it like starting your company? As they moved to the kitchen, where Connor returned to preparing dinner, he described the uncertainty and exhaustion of his first years in business. He spoke of 16-hour workdays, investor rejections, and moments of near failure that had shaped his approach to both business and life. The hardest part wasn't the work or even the financial stress, he explained as he expertly chopped vegetables. It was the isolation. When you're building something from nothing, there's little time for relationships or social lives. Is that still true? Fiona asked, sipping her wine as she watched him move confidently around the kitchen. Connor paused, considering. Less so now that I have an exceptional management team. But there are still weeks when work dominates everything. That's why it's important to me that any relationship I pursue is built on mutual understanding and support. His gaze met hers, serious despite his smile. I value your independence, Fiona. Your passion for your work mirrors my own. That's rare to find. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. Connor's risotto was excellent, as promised, and they ate at the kitchen island rather than the formal dining room, creating an intimacy that belied the apartment's grandeur. After dinner, he gave her a tour that revealed more about him than his wealth, a home office filled with books on economics and philosophy, a guest room converted partly into a gym, a collection of vintage vinyl records that had belonged to his father. He loved music, Connor explained as they examined the collection. Classical jazz, rock everything but country, which my mother adored just to annoy him. Are they still together? Fiona asked, noticing how he spoke of them in tandem. Connor's expression softened with sadness. No, they both passed away. My father had a heart attack when I was in college. My mother followed 3 years later cancer. I'm so sorry, Fiona said, instinctively reaching for his hand. He squeezed her fingers gently. Thank you. It was difficult, especially being an only child. But they left me with clear examples of integrity and compassion. Everything I've accomplished is built on their foundation. This vulnerability, shared quietly without self-pity, touched Fiona deeply. She realized that beneath his success and confidence, Connor had experienced profound loss and solitude experiences that perhaps explained his appreciation for genuine connection. Later, as they sat on his balcony watching the city lights, Connor asked about her own family. Fiona described her close relationship with her parents and sister, their modest but happy life in suburban Ohio, and their unwavering support of her publishing ambitions despite their preference that she choose a more stable career. They sound wonderful, Connor said, his arm resting comfortably around her shoulders. They are, Fiona agreed, though they'd be completely intimidated by all this. She gestured at the penthouse behind them. I doubt that, Connor replied thoughtfully. People who raise children with strong values aren't easily impressed by material success. They'd probably be more concerned with whether I treat you well than with my address or bank account. The observation was so aligned with her parents' actual values that Fiona laughed. You're right. My dad would give you a standard interrogation regardless of your financial status. I look forward to it, Connor said simply, the implication of future family meetings hanging in the air between them. As the evening grew late, Fiona reluctantly mentioned needing to get home. Connor immediately offered to call her a car, but made no attempt to persuade her to stay, respecting the boundaries she had established. At the elevator, he kissed her goodbye with increasing passion, his hands framing her face with gentle possession. When they separated, both were breathing more rapidly. I'll call you tomorrow, he promised, his voice slightly rough. In the car heading back to Brooklyn, Fiona replayed the evening in her mind. Connor's home had indeed reflected his wealth, but more importantly, it had revealed his character thoughtful, unpretentious despite his success, and genuinely interested in creating connection rather than impression. For the first time since they'd begun dating, Fiona allowed herself to imagine a future where their differences in circumstance might not be insurmountable obstacles, but simply facts to be navigated together. The following weeks deepened their connection as spring bloomed fully across the city. They established a comfortable rhythm, seeing each other several times a week despite their busy schedules. Connor occasionally had to cancel last minute due to work emergencies or travel, but he always called personally rather than texting, explaining the situation with genuine regret. Fiona, too, had professional demands that sometimes interfered with their plans, particularly when manuscript deadlines loomed. Connor never complained, instead offering to bring dinner to her apartment so she could continue working if needed. The first time he visited her home, Fiona spent hours cleaning and worrying about the comparison to his penthouse. Her apartment, while neat and personally decorated with bookshelves covering most available wall space, was unmistakably modest. A fifth-floor walk-up with windows facing a brick wall and a kitchen barely large enough for 2 people. Connor arrived with takeout from an excellent Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine, seeming completely at ease as he navigated her small space. "I love your apartment," he said, examining her carefully organized bookshelves. "It's exactly what I'd expect from you, thoughtful, warm, and filled with stories." His sincerity eased her self-consciousness. As they ate at her small dining table, Connor shared stories from his recent business trip to London, describing a disastrous meeting where the power had failed mid-presentation. "There I was, pitch black, trying to continue from memory while someone attempted to find the circuit breaker," he laughed. "I ended up using my phone flashlight to illuminate my notes. Surprisingly, they still signed the deal." "Clearly you're persuasive even in the dark," Fiona teased, relaxing into the comfortable dynamic they'd established. Later, as they sat on her sofa, Connor asked about the manuscript she was editing, a thriller with psychological elements that had potential, but needed significant revision. "The author keeps fighting me on the ending," Fiona explained, frustration evident in her voice. "He wants the ambiguous, artistic conclusion, but readers will find it unsatisfying. They've invested too much in these characters to be left without resolution." "Have you explained it that way?" Connor asked. "Repeatedly, he thinks I'm trying to commercialize his art." Connor considered this. "What if you proposed 2 versions, the original for a special edition or digital bonus, and your revised ending for the main publication? Frame it as giving readers a choice rather than an either-or situation." The suggestion was surprisingly practical. That might actually work. He's protective of his original vision, but he also wants readers. This would preserve both. "Worth a try," Connor said with a shrug. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Fiona was struck by Connor's ability to offer useful advice without being patronizing, a quality rare in her experience with successful men who often assumed their business acumen translated to expertise in all fields. As midnight approached, Connor made no move to leave, instead drawing her closer on the sofa, his kisses growing more insistent. Fiona responded with equal enthusiasm, weeks of building attraction making her bold. When his hand slipped beneath her shirt to trace the curve of her waist, she shivered with anticipation. "Stay," she whispered against his lips, making a decision she'd been considering for days. Connor pulled back slightly to look at her, his eyes darkened with desire but cautious. "Are you sure?" Fiona nodded, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I'm sure." Their lovemaking was both tender and passionate, Connor attentive to her responses with a focus that made her feel treasured rather than merely desired. Afterward, as they lay tangled in her sheets, Fiona felt a profound sense of rightness despite the lingering insecurities about their different worlds. Connor traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, his expression thoughtful in the dim light. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Fiona Zimmerman." The declaration, simple and direct, made her heart race. She raised herself on one elbow to look at him properly. "Are you sure that's wise? We've only known each other a few months." "Wisdom has little to do with love," Connor replied, brushing hair from her face. "But if you're asking if I've thought about this carefully, the answer is yes. I don't say these words lightly." Fiona considered her own feelings, the way Connor had become essential to her days, how she looked forward to his calls and messages, how his perspective had begun to influence her thinking on matters large and small. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted quietly, "but it still scares me sometimes." "What does?" he asked, his fingers continuing their gentle exploration of her skin. "The gap between our worlds, the public scrutiny that must come with your position, the fact that your casual dinner costs more than my weekly grocery budget." She attempted a smile to soften the words, but Connor's expression remained serious. "Those are real concerns," he acknowledged. "I won't pretend there won't be adjustments and occasional awkwardness, but Fiona, the core of who we are and what we value seems remarkably aligned. Isn't that the foundation that matters?" His honesty, acknowledging the challenges without dismissing them, reassured her. Fiona leaned down to kiss him softly. Yes, it is. The following morning, waking beside Connor in her small bed, Fiona experienced a moment of surreal contrast: his expensive watch on her modest nightstand, his tailored clothes draped over her yard sale chair. Yet his smile when he opened his eyes was without pretense, his morning kiss natural and affectionate. "Good morning," he murmured against her lips. "Any chance you have coffee?" Fiona laughed. "I'm not completely uncivilized, though it's drip, not that fancy espresso machine you probably have." "Drip coffee is severely underrated," Connor declared, sitting up and running a hand through his rumpled hair. "Lead the way." They established a domestic routine with surprising ease, Connor handling toast while Fiona prepared coffee. As they ate breakfast at her small table, discussing plans for the day, Fiona marveled at how comfortable it felt, as if they'd been sharing mornings for years rather than hours. The reality of their different schedules intruded when Connor checked his phone, his expression shifting to professional concern. "I need to handle something at the office. There's a situation with our Hong Kong division." "On Saturday?" Fiona asked, though she understood demanding work schedules all too well. "International business," Connor explained with a rueful smile. "Time zones wait for no man. Rain check on that walk in Prospect Park we discussed?" "Of course." Fiona walked him to the door, suddenly shy again. "I'll talk to you later." Connor kissed her thoroughly before leaving, apparently unconcerned about his rumpled appearance or the fact he was wearing yesterday's clothes. "Count on it." True to his word, Connor called that evening, apologizing again for his abrupt departure and suggesting dinner the following night. Over the next several weeks, their relationship deepened as they navigated the practical aspects of their different lives. Connor never made Fiona feel inadequate about financial disparities, casually paying for expensive restaurants, but equally content with pizza in the park. When he suggested activities that might strain her budget, he framed them as his treat without drawing attention to the arrangement. For her part, Fiona worked to overcome her pride, accepting Connor's generosity without constant protest while maintaining her independence in other areas. She refused his offer to send his driver when she was working late, preferring the subway despite his safety concerns, and insisted on occasionally cooking for him rather than always being treated to restaurants. Their first significant challenge came when Connor invited her to attend a charity gala, where he was being honored for his foundation's work supporting educational initiatives in underserved communities, an aspect of his life he'd mentioned but hadn't emphasized. "It's formal," he explained over dinner at her apartment. "Black tie. I should warn you there will be press coverage since several celebrities support the foundation." Fiona set down her fork, anxiety immediately surfacing. "Press coverage? Connor, I don't have anything appropriate for something like that. And I've never navigated reporters or photographers." "The dress is easily solved," Connor said practically. "As for the press, we can arrive after the red carpet portion if you prefer, or I can attend alone if you're truly uncomfortable." The latter suggestion, offered without pressure, made Fiona realize how important her support might be to him. "No, I want to be there for you. I'm just nervous about fitting in." Connor reached across the table for her hand. "You'll be with me. Anyone who matters will be delighted to meet the woman who's made me happier than I've been in years." His sincerity was impossible to resist. Fiona agreed to attend, though her stomach knotted at the thought of being photographed and potentially scrutinized alongside Connor. The dress shopping expedition that followed was both exciting and intimidating. Connor had offered to help, but Fiona preferred to handle this herself, taking Lisa along for moral support and honest opinions. "This is surreal," Lisa declared as they entered their third high-end boutique. "My best friend is shopping for a gown to wear to a gala with her millionaire boyfriend. It's like a movie plot." "Please stop saying that," Fiona groaned, flipping through a rack of evening dresses with increasing desperation. "Everything is either too revealing, too matronly, or costs more than 3 months' rent." "Good thing your man can afford it," Lisa replied, holding up a slinky red number that Fiona immediately rejected. "I'm paying for this myself," Fiona insisted. "I need to maintain some financial independence." Lisa rolled her eyes but continued searching until they found a contender, an elegant midnight blue gown with subtle beading that emphasized Fiona's slender frame without being overly revealing. The price made her wince, but it was within the budget she'd reluctantly established for this special occasion. When she tried it on, even the boutique attendant nodded approvingly. "It's perfect," Lisa declared. "Connor will swallow his tongue." The night of the gala arrived with impeccable spring weather. Connor had offered to pick her up, but Fiona decided to meet him at his apartment, wanting to ensure she was completely ready before seeing him. She arrived with her hair professionally styled in an updo that had consumed a significant portion of her cosmetics budget, but felt worth every penny. When Connor opened his door, his expression of appreciative awe justified all her preparation efforts. He looked stunning in his tuxedo, the formal wear emphasizing his broad shoulders and lean physique. "You are breathtaking," he said simply, drawing her inside. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Fiona replied, attempting lightness despite her nerves. Connor sensed her anxiety. "We don't have to stay long if you're uncomfortable. Just the dinner and my brief speech, then we can escape if you'd like." His consideration eased her tension. "I'll be fine. This is important for your foundation." "You're important to me," Connor countered, taking her hand. "But thank you for being here. It means more than you know." They arrived at the hotel ballroom after the initial red carpet, but still faced several photographers who called Connor's name as they entered. He handled them with practiced ease, keeping his arm firmly around Fiona's waist as they posed briefly before moving inside. The ballroom was spectacular, with crystal chandeliers and elaborate floral arrangements. Tables filled with New York's elite circled a dance floor and stage. Fiona recognized several faces from magazines and television, fighting the surreal feeling of walking through a celebrity news program. Connor navigated the crowd confidently, introducing Fiona to business associates, foundation board members, and the occasional famous face. To her surprise, most were genuinely warm, particularly those who clearly knew Connor well. "So you're the reason Connor's been turning down dinner invitations," remarked an elegant older woman who introduced herself as Connor's former mentor. "I've never seen him look so content." Before Fiona could respond, they were approached by a striking blonde whose air of entitlement was palpable even before she spoke. "Connor, darling, I've been looking everywhere for you." "Victoria," Connor acknowledged with polite reserve, "I didn't realize you'd be attending tonight." "Daddy's table," the woman explained with a dismissive wave before turning her calculated gaze to Fiona. "And who's your friend?" "This is Fiona Zimmerman," Connor said, his arm tightening slightly around Fiona's waist. "Fiona, Victoria Hargrove is the daughter of one of our foundation's contributors." Victoria's assessment was swift and barely disguised. "Zimmerman? I don't believe I know the family." "You wouldn't," Fiona replied evenly. "We're not in the society pages." Connor's lips twitched with suppressed amusement as Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "How novel for you, Connor. Well, don't forget you promised me a dance at the Richardson benefit last month." "I don't recall making that promise," Connor said smoothly, "but I'm afraid my evening is already committed." He nodded politely as Victoria departed with visible annoyance. "Ex-girlfriend?" Fiona asked, keeping her tone light despite the twist of insecurity the encounter had provoked. "Barely even that," Connor assured her. "One charity dinner and she's been attempting to advance the relationship ever since. Her father is an important business connection, so I've had to remain polite." "She's very beautiful," Fiona observed, watching Victoria rejoin a table of equally polished socialites. "And completely aware of it," Connor replied. "Beauty without substance holds little appeal for me." He turned Fiona to face him fully. "You, on the other hand, possess both in abundance." The dinner proceeded more smoothly than Fiona had anticipated. She was seated at Connor's table with foundation board members who were genuinely interesting conversationalists, discussing the educational programs they supported with passion rather than rehearsed talking points. When Connor was called to the stage to accept an award and give remarks, Fiona felt a surge of pride watching him. He spoke eloquently but without pretension about the Foundation's mission to provide technological education to underserved communities, acknowledging his team rather than claiming personal credit for their successes. Our privilege comes with responsibility, he concluded, his gaze finding Fiona in the crowd, not just to give financially, but to create sustainable systems that empower others to build their own success stories. Thank you for supporting this vision. The applause was genuine, and when Connor returned to the table, several people stopped him to express appreciation for his message. Fiona squeezed his hand under the table, wordlessly communicating her pride. As the formal portion of the evening concluded and the band began playing dance music, Connor led Fiona to the floor. In his arms, moving to a slow jazz standard, she momentarily forgot about the wealthy observers and potential photographers. "You were wonderful up there," she told him. "I had no idea your foundation was doing such important work." Connor looked slightly embarrassed. "I don't talk about it much. It feels self-congratulatory." "It's not," Fiona insisted. "It's admirable. You're using your success to create opportunity for others." His expression softened as he drew her closer. "Thank you for being here tonight. Having you witness this part of my life means everything to me." The intimacy of the moment was interrupted when Victoria appeared beside them, champagne in hand and determination in her eyes. "I simply must borrow Connor for a moment. Daddy wants to discuss increasing his contribution." Before either could respond, Victoria's companion, a man Fiona hadn't noticed, turned to her with a practiced smile. "Perhaps you'll dance with me while they talk business? I'm James, Victoria's brother." Trapped by social convention, Fiona reluctantly allowed James to lead her in dance as Victoria practically dragged Connor toward an older man across the room. "So, how did you meet Connor?" James asked, his hand resting slightly too low on Fiona's back. "Through friends," Fiona replied shortly, maintaining as much distance as the dance allowed. "Interesting. Connor usually dates within certain circles. What did you say your family does?" The question was deliberately provoking. Fiona met his gaze coolly. "My father teaches high school mathematics, and my mother is a nurse. I'm an editor at Pinnacle Publishing." James's eyebrows rose. How quaint. Connor must find that refreshing after his usual dating pool. "I wouldn't know about his usual dating pool," Fiona replied, increasingly uncomfortable with both the conversation and James's wandering hand. "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom." She extracted herself from his grasp and made her way to the ladies' room, needing a moment to collect herself. The elegant bathroom was occupied by several women touching up their makeup, including, unfortunately, Victoria. "Oh, it's Connor's little editor," Victoria said, her voice carrying to the other women, who turned with undisguised curiosity. "Darling, I hope James wasn't too forward. He has a weakness for novelty." Fiona met Victoria's gaze in the mirror, recognizing the deliberate attempt to unsettle her. "Your brother's preferences don't interest me." "No, just Connor's bank account, I imagine," Victoria replied with a venomous smile, "though you should know he'll tire of this philanthropic phase. Connor always returns to women who understand his world." Rather than engaging further, Fiona washed her hands calmly and dried them on a plush towel. "I understand Connor perfectly well. He values authenticity, kindness, and integrity, qualities that appear to be in short supply at your family table. Enjoy the rest of your evening." She left the bathroom with her head high, though her heart hammered with adrenaline from the confrontation. Connor was waiting near the bathroom entrance, concern evident on his face. "Are you all right? I saw James cornered you." "I'm fine," Fiona assured him, though her voice was less steady than she'd hoped. "Just a reminder that not everyone in your world will welcome me with open arms." Connor's expression darkened. "What did they say to you?" "Nothing worth repeating," Fiona replied, not wanting to create a scene. "But I think I'm ready to leave if you've fulfilled your obligations here." Connor studied her face before nodding. "More than fulfilled. Let's go." In the car returning to his apartment, Fiona was quieter than usual, processing the evening's contrasts, the genuine warmth of some attendees versus the calculated cruelty of others like Victoria, who clearly saw her as an interloper. "I'm sorry if tonight was difficult," Connor said finally, breaking the silence. The Hargroves are particularly unpleasant, but they're outliers, not representatives. Fiona turned to him, suddenly needing reassurance. Connor, am I a phase for you? A break from your normal world that you'll eventually tire of? Connor's expression registered surprise, then anger. Is that what Victoria implied? That you're temporary? When Fiona nodded, Connor took her hand firmly in his. Listen to me. I've dated women from backgrounds similar to Victoria's, and those relationships failed precisely because they lacked substance. They were based on mutual social benefit rather than genuine connection. His gaze was intense, almost fierce in its conviction. What we have is real, Fiona. You challenge me intellectually, make me laugh, support my goals while maintaining your own identity. You see me as a person, not a portfolio. That's irreplaceable, not a phase. The conviction in his voice dispelled Fiona's doubts. She leaned across the seat to kiss him softly. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Back at Connor's apartment, as they changed out of their formal wear, Fiona felt a deeper appreciation for the man behind the successful facade. He had created a life of privilege, but remained grounded in values that transcended wealth, compassion, integrity, and genuine connection. As they lay in his bed later, Connor pulled her close, his voice thoughtful in the darkness. I've been meaning to ask you something. What's that? Fiona murmured, already half asleep. My company is opening a European office. I need to go to London for 2 weeks next month to oversee the launch. Would you consider coming with me? You could work remotely for part of it, and we'd have evenings and weekends to explore together. The invitation represented a significant step, 2 weeks together, abroad, a public acknowledgement of their relationship's seriousness. Fiona turned to face him in the dimness. That's a big request, she said carefully. I'd need to check with my boss about remote work. Of course, Connor replied. There's no pressure. I'd miss you and I'd love to share London with you. The simple honesty of his admission touched her deeply. I'll ask on Monday. To Fiona's surprise, her boss was supportive of the arrangement, noting that she had accumulated substantial vacation time and that her current projects could be managed remotely with appropriate planning. Lisa was ecstatic when Fiona shared the news. 2 weeks in London with your millionaire boyfriend? This is straight out of a romance novel, Lisa declared over lunch. Please tell me you're packing lingerie that doesn't come in a 3-pack from Target. Is that all you think about? Fiona asked, though she had indeed invested in some nicer sleepwear for the trip. When it comes to you and Connor? Absolutely, Lisa admitted shamelessly. Someone needs to ensure this fairy tale continues. Have you told your parents about him yet? Fiona hesitated. Not entirely. They know I'm seeing someone, but I've downplayed his financial situation. My dad is sensitive about class differences. He'd worry Connor isn't serious about someone with our background. You can't hide it forever, Lisa pointed out, especially if this keeps progressing, which it obviously is if he's taking you to London. I know, Fiona sighed. I'll tell them more when we get back, one potential family crisis at a time. The London trip exceeded Fiona's expectations. Connor had arranged for them to stay in a luxury serviced apartment in Mayfair, providing both the amenities of a hotel and the privacy of a home. During weekdays, Fiona worked remotely while Connor attended meetings at the new office, but they explored the city together in evenings and weekends. Connor proved to be a knowledgeable guide, having spent significant time in London for business. He took her to hidden gems beyond the typical tourist attractions, a tiny bookshop specializing in rare first editions, a pub dating back to the 1500s that served spectacular pies, gardens tucked behind ancient walls that offered peaceful retreats from the urban bustle. One rainy afternoon, they visited the British Library, where Fiona stood transfixed before glass cases containing original manuscripts from authors whose words had shaped her love of literature. This is incredible, she whispered, leaning close to examine Jane Austen's neat handwriting. To see their actual pages, the crossed-out words, the process. Connor watched her with evident pleasure. Your face right now, it's how I feel when I see an elegantly structured business plan or a perfect market analysis. Fiona laughed. That's possibly the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm serious, Connor insisted, drawing her away from the display. Passion is beautiful, whatever its focus. Your love of literature, of words and stories, it illuminates you from within. In that moment, surrounded by literary treasures in a foreign city, Fiona felt a certainty settle in her heart. What she and Connor shared transcended their different circumstances, building instead on mutual respect and genuine delight in each other's unique qualities. The realization deepened during their final weekend in London, when Connor surprised her with tickets to a sold-out West End production she'd mentioned wanting to see. As they walked back to their apartment afterward, discussing the performance through light rain, Connor suddenly stopped beneath a street lamp. I love you, Fiona, he said without preamble, raindrops glistening in his dark hair. I know we haven't known each other long by conventional standards, but I've never been more certain of anything. You've brought joy and perspective into my life that I didn't realize was missing. The declaration, though not entirely unexpected given their growing closeness, still took Fiona's breath away. She reached up to touch his face, rain damp and beloved. I love you too, she replied simply, despite all my practical objections and fears about our different worlds. Connor smiled, pulling her close to kiss her thoroughly, oblivious to the light rain or passing pedestrians. When they separated, his expression was serious again. I want to build a life with you, Fiona. Not immediately, I respect that we're still learning each other, but I want you to know that's where my heart is headed. The commitment in his words both thrilled and terrified her. We still have challenges to navigate, she reminded him. My family, your business world, practical questions about where and how we'd live. All solvable problems when two people are committed to finding solutions, Connor replied confidently. I'm not suggesting we have all the answers tonight. Just that I'm dedicated to finding them with you. Their return to New York brought practical reality back into focus. Fiona resumed her full-time office schedule, while Connor traveled frequently as his European expansion continued. Still, they maintained their connection through daily calls and texts, spending nights together whenever possible. 3 months after their London trip, Connor suggested they visit Ohio to meet Fiona's family. It's time, he said as they prepared dinner in his kitchen one evening. I want to know the people who raised such an extraordinary woman. Fiona hesitated, knife poised over a bell pepper. My parents are wonderful, but they're also protective, and not particularly impressed by wealth or status. Good, Connor replied, stirring sauce on the stove. Neither am I, fundamentally. I value what it allows me to accomplish, but I don't confuse net worth with self-worth. I think your father and I might understand each other better than you expect. The visit was arranged for a weekend in early fall. Fiona warned her parents that Connor was successful in finance, but deliberately avoided specifics about his company or lifestyle. As they drove a rental car from the Cleveland airport toward her hometown, Fiona grew increasingly nervous. Remember, their house is modest, she cautioned, and my dad might interrogate you about your intentions. Connor reached across the console to squeeze her hand. Fiona, I grew up in a 3-bedroom ranch house in New Jersey. My father was a high school principal who wore the same 5 ties in rotation for 20 years. I'm not going to judge your family's home, and I welcome your father's questions. The reminder of Connor's own middle-class origins eased her anxiety somewhat. Still, when they pulled into the driveway of her childhood home, a well-maintained but clearly aging colonial with a slightly overgrown garden, Fiona watched Connor closely for his reaction. He simply smiled, taking in the basketball hoop above the garage and the wind chimes hanging from the porch. It looks like a home, he said softly, not just a house. Before they reached the front door, it swung open to reveal Fiona's parents, her father tall and silver-haired with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, her mother petite with Fiona's auburn coloring and a welcoming smile. There she is, her mother exclaimed, enveloping Fiona in a tight hug before turning her attention to Connor. And you must be Connor. I'm Margaret, and this is Robert. Welcome to our home. Connor shook hands with both parents, his manner warm but respectful. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to finally meet you both. Fiona speaks of you with great affection. Robert Zimmerman's assessing gaze took in Connor's casual but clearly expensive clothing and confident posture. Well, come on in. We can get acquainted over lunch. The initial conversation was general travel details, Fiona's work updates, local news, but Fiona recognized her father's reserved manner as he observed Connor carefully. After lunch, when her mother insisted on giving Connor a tour of their modest backyard garden, Robert asked Fiona to help him with dishes, a transparent excuse for private conversation. So, he began as they stood side by side at the sink, you didn't mention that your Connor runs one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the country. Fiona nearly dropped the plate she was rinsing. You Googled him. Of course I did, Robert replied unapologetically. Did you think I wouldn't research the man my daughter has been dating for months? The question is why you didn't tell us. Fiona sighed, setting the plate in the drying rack. Because I knew you'd worry about the disparity, that his world is too different from ours, that eventually he'd move on to someone more suitable. Robert turned to face her fully. Is that what you believe will happen? No, Fiona admitted. Not anymore. He's not what I expected, Dad. His success hasn't changed his fundamental values or made him forget where he came from. Through the kitchen window, they could see Connor kneeling beside her mother in the garden, examining something she was showing him with genuine interest. He seems to care for you, Robert observed. He does, Fiona confirmed softly. And I love him, Dad. I wasn't looking for this. You know, I've always been cautious about relationships. But Connor is. He sees me. The real me. Robert watched his daughter's face, recognizing the certainty in her expression. Then his bank account is irrelevant, isn't it? In either direction. The weekend progressed more smoothly after that initial conversation. Connor won over Margaret completely by showing interest in her quilting and offering genuinely useful advice for Robert's retirement investment questions. By Sunday morning, when Connor joined Robert for an early coffee on the porch while Fiona and her mother prepared breakfast, it felt as if he'd been part of their family gatherings for years rather than days. On the flight back to New York, Connor took Fiona's hand, his expression thoughtful. Thank you for sharing your family with me. They're wonderful people. They liked you, Fiona confirmed. Even my dad, which isn't easy to accomplish. What did you two talk about this morning? Connor smiled slightly. Many things. His concerns for your happiness, his appreciation for my foundation work, which he had researched thoroughly, and eventually, his blessing for our future, whatever form it might take. Fiona's heart skipped. He said that? He did, Connor confirmed, though he also made it clear that disappointing his daughter would be unwise for my continued well-being. Fiona laughed, imagining her gentle but protective father delivering this warning. That sounds like Dad. I assured him my intentions are entirely honorable, Connor continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. Which brings me to something I've been considering. Fiona's breath caught as Connor reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Even in the confined space of their first-class seats, he managed to shift to one knee in the aisle beside her. This isn't how I planned to do this, he admitted, opening the box to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond set in platinum. I had elaborate arrangements for next weekend involving that bookshop you love and a private dinner. But sitting with your father this morning, seeing the home where you grew up, I realized I don't want to wait another day to ask you to be my wife. Fiona was vaguely aware of other passengers watching with interest, but her focus remained entirely on Connor's earnest expression. Fiona Zimmerman, I love you more than I believed possible. Your intelligence, compassion, and integrity have transformed my understanding of what matters in life. Will you marry me? Tears blurred Fiona's vision as she nodded, unable to speak immediately. When she found her voice, it was steadier than she expected. Yes, I'll marry you. Connor slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, before rising to kiss her as several passengers applauded. When he returned to his seat, his smile was both triumphant and tender. "I hope you don't mind the public proposal. I couldn't wait." "It was perfect," Fiona assured him, admiring the ring that somehow managed to be spectacular without being ostentatious. "Though I'm curious about what you had planned for next weekend." "That's still a surprise," Connor replied with a grin. "Being engaged doesn't mean I can't still court you properly." The engagement announcement was met with enthusiasm from their friends and families. Lisa claimed partial credit as matchmaker, while Connor's business associates expressed genuine pleasure at seeing their typically work-focused CEO so obviously happy. Only Victoria Hargrove and her social circle responded with barely disguised incredulity, though their reactions mattered little to either Fiona or Connor. Wedding planning presented new challenges as they navigated different expectations. Connor was happy to accommodate Fiona's desire for a relatively intimate ceremony, but insisted on handling the financial aspects completely, a point of pride for him that Fiona eventually accepted with grace. "It's not about showing off," he explained when she expressed concern about costs. "It's about celebrating properly and removing any stress from your parents. Please let me do this for us." They compromised on a spring wedding at a historic mansion in the Hudson Valley, with around 100 guests, small by society standards, but larger than Fiona had initially envisioned. The planning process revealed new aspects of their relationship dynamic, with Connor proving surprisingly detail-oriented, while Fiona maintained focus on the meaningful elements rather than superficial aesthetics. 6 months after Connor's impromptu airplane proposal, Fiona stood in a preparation room at the venue, her mother adjusting the delicate lace veil in her hair. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Margaret said, emotion evident in her voice, "and more importantly, you look happy." "I am," Fiona confirmed, smoothing the elegant silk of her gown. She had chosen a design that was sophisticated without being extravagant, though Connor had insisted on flying in the designer from Paris for fittings. "Your father is trying very hard not to cry," Margaret confided. "He's been practicing his walk all morning to make sure he doesn't trip." Fiona laughed, picturing her dignified father rehearsing in the guest cottage where her parents were staying. "Tell him I'll catch him if he stumbles." A knock at the door announced Lisa, resplendent in her maid-of-honor dress. "It's time." Connor's at the altar looking devastatingly handsome and completely terrified. "He's nervous?" Fiona asked, surprised. Connor typically handled pressure with ease. "Terrified might be an exaggeration," Lisa admitted, "but he's definitely checking his watch every 30 seconds. I think he's afraid you've come to your senses and run off with the gardener." "The gardener is 65 and happily married," Fiona pointed out, gathering her bouquet. "And I have absolutely not come to my senses, thankfully." When the doors opened and Fiona began her procession on her father's arm, she had eyes only for Connor, standing tall and impossibly handsome at the altar. His expression as he watched her approach was one of such naked adoration that her earlier nervousness dissolved completely. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with personalized vows they had written together. Connor's voice remained steady as he promised to cherish her mind as well as her heart, to build a partnership of equals despite their different starting points, and to remember always that their greatest wealth was in their connection to each other. Fiona's vows acknowledged the unlikely nature of their meeting and the fears she had overcome to embrace their love. "You've shown me that true compatibility isn't about identical backgrounds, but about shared values, mutual respect, and the courage to grow together," she concluded, her voice firm despite her emotional state. At the reception, Connor surprised Fiona with a special gift, the deed to a charming brownstone in Brooklyn that they had admired during a weekend walk months earlier. "I know my penthouse isn't your style," he explained as they shared a private moment between dances. "I thought we could make this our primary home close to your work, but with enough space for both of us to have offices, plus room for future expansions." The thoughtfulness of the gift acknowledging her preference for Brooklyn while ensuring the home was comfortable for both their needs exemplified Connor's approach to their relationship, generous without imposing, considerate of her identity while creating space for their shared future. Later, as they departed for their honeymoon, a tour of literary landmarks throughout Europe that Connor had arranged with input from Fiona's wish list, he pulled her close in the privacy of their limousine. "Happy?" he asked simply. Fiona leaned into his embrace, thinking of the blind date she had so reluctantly attended, the millionaire she had never expected to love, and the future they would build together, a future richer in possibility than either could have created alone. "Completely," she answered, and sealed the promise with a kiss.